I have spent some time looking over Psychopomp.
Mhm.
And this sort of realm has been traversed before, right?
Um, what do you mean? I'm sure there have been other games. I'm not sure if I know all the ones that have
Okay.
been.
Well, what I'm saying is it's not just the precise, premise, but it is also, if you will, the kind of psycho horror, self discovery, but desperate monster battles in the
Mhm.
dark kind
Right.
of arrangement. And I'm not mocking it because it's not, any sillier or less silly than, any other.
Right.
But it has a special place in the hearts uh, of many
Mhm.
that's semi generational, but certainly not confined to one specific age. But it definitely peaked in a particular period, and gaming is really, really full of it in that particular period. So we're talking about the
Right.
90s.
Right.
Okay, well, I thought maybe it would be a good idea to look at some of the other titles.
Mhm.
Um, I'm always hesitant about that because sometimes you do that and the person says, well, he's trying to tell me it's all been done before.
Right.
And that's not really my message. My message is that every game has its own take, and sometimes it's useful to kind of position yourself relative to the other takes. Or if you are aiming at a particular mechanic or aesthetic, then the way that this game may have addressed it exactly, you can say, aha, um, how do I want to, how do I want to do it differently? Do I want to do it that way? What did they get out of it? Is that what I want to get out of it? Um, and in my case, for a couple of games that I had in mind, um, the fact that somebody had done something very much like it, uh, I have a very ambiguous relationship to that emotionally.
Mhm.
Sometimes, sometimes it's confirmatory, and you're like, "Oh, good, we're all into this."
Right.
Other times, it's exactly the opposite. It's just like, "There goes my chance,"
Right.
and I don't know really why the same person can have those two different reactions to effectively the same phenomenon. It may be that in the second case, I had become invested in being surprising or recognized as the guy who did that in gaming.
Right.
And if I were invested in that, then obviously it's kind of too bad. One almost wants a really shitty game to have come before
Right.
rather than a good one, which is a very ungenerous way of looking at, one's fellow hobbyists.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of lay out that profile on my part so that you don't get the idea that I'm Mr. Original who never, ran into that.
Right.
Um, and so I'm trying to be constructive with bringing these other ones up. Some of them I think are kind of notable. One of them, which is readily available to talk about because I had a great big conversation about it and it's posted at Adept Play, is Les Montmarie.
Mm.
And I don't know, it's one of the conversations in seminar. You can see me having a fairly extensive conversation. It's by Sean Demery. I refer you to the video, but briefly. The characters are all kind of Vodun beings who
Mhm.
live in a mysterious city of the dead.
Mhm.
Um, and they have generated a life there, which is sort of best described as semi-Victorian Haitian weird.
Mhm.
Um, and they are all utterly dysfunctional. And the thing that's relevant here is, first of all, we're talking about sort of the realm of the dead, although in this case it's more like a city in which they walk around. It's not, and I mean, it's obviously an afterlife, but it's not experienced as an afterlife. It's experienced as a city that they live in. And they have very, very shitty memories, just a few scraps. Kind of, in a way, a little bit like your characters if they were kind of, marked up.
Right.
And the important thing is that they can utilize those memories, and there's kind of a nice soft touch about that mechanically. They, I think I'd have to review the system a little bit, or review my talk that I did with the guy Ken about it. But the memories aren't quite as straightforward as just burn it for a bonus. They do fade. And most importantly, the character sort of reshapes the memories into an identity that may be very little like the one that they came from.
Right.
You don't ever find out about the real life. And I think that's kind of important. A similar one, a game which I absolutely love, and in fact it's a bit of a go-to when it comes to breaking the ice with somebody, or even conceivably I could see it as one of the best games as an introduction to the activity, although that's a pretty controversial statement, is Cold Soldier by Brett Gillen. And in Cold Soldier, you're playing an undead of some kind. It's a two-person game. The game master, called the Dark Master, is playing whoever raised it. And play is conducted very verbally, does not use a familiar dice system at all. It uses a deck of cards, and they're used in a sort of a more dramatic scene resolution fashion that is very tense in terms of whether you keep cards or gain them. Keep cards or lose them. Anyway, the point of the memories there is that you begin with no memories stated, but you improvise memories into existence as you go along, as the mindless Hulk that your character is fleetingly reminded of things. And so you're building memories as you go, and as you do so, you will be able to retain cards. Those cards may be burned for purposes as you go along, but that doesn't burn the memories. So you actually, you don't burn the memories to blow those cards. You just lose the cards if you use them in a certain way later. So the character does accumulate memories. It's kind of not, you don't get to make much of a memory, and I don't think it's really all that possible to literally rebuild the character's life. But the memories are being built, and they give the character more identity as you go. The thing I'm driving at is that in both of those games, memories are resources, but they are not quite as straightforward resources as you have them. You have, the reason I brought those games up is because in your game, as conceived at the moment in the 4-page treatment, is in that you've got you've got your sort of big memory, sort of your completed memory, even though it is just one, but it is a fairly complete whole memory. And then as you draw upon it, it gets diminished, right? It gets kind of torn apart or reduced until finally it's gone, and you replace it with a mark. And also another thing you talked about was that scraps of memories can kind of swim into existence through play as well. Okay. Well, it's real straightforward. You lose some of the memory. It's basically like a bank.
Mm-hmm.
and it's played. And one of the things you were concerned about was whether, how do I make the memories more visceral? Hey,
Hey, sorry.
yeah. How do I make the memories more visceral? How do I make the memories more believed, if for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
invested in as dramatic elements? And one thing I would say is review both of those games, and you will see memories that have mechanical roles which are not, in fact, treated in that utterly resource bank way. They are softer subsystems rather than being kind of a great big chunky, in the same currency as the resolution, wad. And you even kind of caricatured yourself when you were talking about what a memory meant in play. You were kind of like, I shall remember the death of my beloved. Now I can fight this bone dragon.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
arguably the intuitive quality you were talking about, you were saying, well, doesn't that just give us a maudlin flashback?
Right. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And I think that your intuition in writing that piece in your treatment, that sort of self-questioning bit in your treatment, was absolutely on target. And it is because you're making the memories so rock solid a piece of the resolution system.
Mm.
And there are times, I know it kind of goes against the stereotype of the Forge game to say subroutines are not always a bad thing.
Right.
That a subroutine doesn't have to be just a bonus in the middle of the existing resolution system. And in fact, that point of view has led us to some very bad game design. Role play your character for a bonus.
Right.
And it's hard to say. There's a way of doing that I call breadcrumb play. If you role play your character, I'll throw you a breadcrumb. And that's what I'm criticizing.
Right.
There are more light-hearted, light-fingered, soft-touch ways of having mechanics based on memories and feelings that are not just as crude as, act it out a little bit in that regard and get a die. In that way, when and if they come in, they actually are less arbitrary, not more.
Right.
It's also a question of the foe. And that's one thing I wanted to address with you in terms of the adversaries of play, and we can talk about that in a minute.